So I want to paste the GitHub link here if someone wants to follow through. And if someone wants to follow through, I think when you can start the chat so that you can paste something. So that I want to share the,
Okay.
or let me share with you so that you can paste and share. If someone wants to
Yeah.
do as I do it, please, that's the GitHub repo. It's not, I think I did a simple example, so we'll just first start with the theory. So the presentation today is about testing your code, basically unit testing using Angular Comma. So, so basically this is what all organizations aim for. This is the testing pyramid. I think if you're into knowing what to test in organization, you've seen this diagram. So the most tests are the unit tests, which are down there, which test the simple units or bits of your code. Then we have integration testing, which tests the connection of your various components or functions within the application. Then we have now the E2E test. So today we will focus on the bottom pyramid unit test. So what is unit tests? I think most of you know. It's just testing the individual units and components of an application. And why do we need to do unit testing? Basically, it's just to make sure everything performs as expected, and it actually validates if the probably the return type of the function is correct just before you integrate that function with the rest of the application. So what are we using? I think most of you have seen, if you've run Comma in Angular, you've seen something like this. And how do you get to do this? If you have your Angular application, if you do an ng test without doing a lot of configuration on how you can start your test, you should be able to see this window. If you actually just download, install any Angular app, you just initialize an app, then you do ng test. This is the first thing you will see. So why are we using TestBeds, and why are we not using TestBed, and why are people using TestBed? So basically, if you want to do component testing, let's say you want to check if a specific header has been rendered, if a specific button is visible, I think, and if you want to test like the whole, I think most of us have done, you use Comma to test and you see the whole application running through and through. I think that is more integration testing, and TestBed I usually used at that point. Basically, when you want to render and interact with the DOM, TestBeds are normally very, very recommended. However, when you use TestBeds, the problem is you will have to set up like the whole app. You have to set up modules and everything there so that TestBed can actually work. So it makes it slightly slower. And there's some mocks that you can't really mock some things because TestBeds normally are limited. And three, you can find yourself not really testing the core functions of the app, but just test the whole E2E, how the application runs. So if you want to test every single unit of your application, it's recommended that you go the other route, not TestBed, so that you test the component thoroughly. That is the functions and methods that you've written. So why are we not using TestBed? Basically, it's faster. Then it's easy to do simple unit tests without involving any component interaction. If you write a function in your component, how do you test it? I think isolating and removing TestBeds gives you more control of that. And you can actually mock a lot of dependencies when you don't use TestBeds because you don't use the inbuilt TestBed functionality that is provided, but you actually mock the scenarios that you want. So when you have that in mind, so then how do you start testing? I think someone would ask that question. So the first thing when you want to test is just you prepare first what you want to test, and that is, what do I want to test? Do I have the data? Can I get access to the component? Do I have the service? Then you prepare it. Then the next thing you have to do is basically if you're testing probably a method, you call that method, that means you execute it, and at the end of the day, you do an assertion. So this is the general testing pattern that is normally used. You prepare, you execute, and you assert, just to make sure your results actually match the expected behavior. And what syntax will we use right now is this is it. So I will take you through the theory that I've just taken you through before with this simple unit test syntax. So the syntax that I will be using here is the common describe it syntax. So basically preparing is just calling, probably you're supposed to call a function first before this test runs. So you prepare it first. Then for you to execute, you'll call here, you'll say this dot call this pi. Then you do your expectations. Probably you expect this to equal to the mock. So this is the syntax that will be used. And I think if you've interacted with a lot of testing, this is the main syntax that is used during unit testing. So I think with the theory, that's what I had prepared. So you'll go into code. So I started a simple application. So I will take you through just the bare component, bare structure of my application here. It's just a basic application that just shows cars and their models. I don't know much about cars. I think this one is just the test data was easy to find. So don't ask me about Audis or Mercedes. I know nothing. So this is, if I launch my application, this is it. So basically it has, I'll show you, I created a service here with static data. So probably this data would come from the backend, but here I wanted to manipulate the data. So I created my array here, my object with types of cars, which has a make, a model, then the miles covered. Then it initializes the car with this array of, it's just an array of objects. So it will initialize my car array of type car. So car, I think it's an interface. I created an interface with type car, which accepts the make, the model, and the miles. So then with my function, I'm expecting I can add a car inside. I can remove a car and I can actually fetch the cars. So I model this service. This can come from your backend. You can get data from backend with already defined interfaces, or you create your own interface. So I mocked my service here. So now this is where the magic happens. So in my component, the first thing first, I wanted to, you ignore the observable. So the first thing first is I wanted to fetch the cars. So as you know, I'll have to inject the service here and get the cars. So once I execute this, I would actually get my cars here. So I'm just taking you through this, then we can see what we can test from here now. So then this one is just to return to us the length, and if this car has no value or it has a length which is less than 1, we want to be able to populate our behavior subject so that we can handle the state of some elements in our component. Then we can actually remove a car. So this is what exists in our function. So if you go to our spec, if I could have initialized this component with TestBeds, I think first things first, I could have had this. I don't know if it works because I did a lot of, it is not as I started, but let us see. If we had TestBeds, what could have happened? So with TestBeds, I think what we could have done, we could have actually done all this. We import the whole component here. We use TestBeds, we configure. So first things first is we're using this component, so we could have done this importation. If we had modules here, we could have actually called all of them here to configure the TestBeds. So it means we could have actually run everything that we run in our modules, but now in the test. So that makes everything so slow for us to wait for all these things to be done on the testbed. So that's why we recommend doing it without testbeds. So first things first, if I wanted to use testbeds, probably I could have gone through here and checked the title. So we can run this test and see. I think our test should fail. Here is the test because our title doesn't look like that, but I think this is a time to execute and see if everything. I'm expecting it to fail because the title is not the same. So we'll run ng test. because we changed the title, but let us just see. If you run and test, yes, correct. So our test has failed because one, the title changed. So this is a correct one. I expected it to fail because it's no longer saying welcome to Angular but cars. And this is what TestBed does. You can do component testing. As you come here, you see our title is called cars and no longer welcome to Angular. So if we modify our test and see uh, H1 to have content this, our test should pass. So this is the advantages of using testbeds. So yeah, that I think that's what I wanted to show you guys. And if we had testbeds, yeah, that's what I wanted to show you. Like if you can run your tests with using testbed, you see our test pass until here. So here we tested the component, the chain element. But now we don't want to test this. We want to test now the core functionality of our code. So that's what this demo is about. So I will just comment it out and do how would we test this whole component with our test beds. So I will comment this out. Go here, we will go step by step. So we first start. What does our component? Okay, there's something I've not. Okay, give me a moment. So we'll start here. Mm, let me comment out the beds. Yeah, should be. So let's start mocking our whole component. So we will start here. This component has a few elements. It has this give a subject, and we have this title, which I don't really use. I think we want to do that. Then I have this car, which is of type cars, which I'm actually using to render my, as I think I've shown you here, using to render reason. Then I have this constructor that I'm fetching. I'm injecting that I'm injecting my service, which I use to fetch my data. So I want on init, actually, as you've seen, I wanted to fetch data from the car data from this service. Then I want to actually check for length. Then I can be able to remove, and I have this private function that we would actually also test. So first things first, when we are testing, the thing is not working. Um, what's complaining? I'm just running. Okay. The thing is complaining. So you can ignore that. So first things first, we have to prepare. We have this component, which is this component. Then we have our service. So let's go back to our service. You've seen I've used here Jasmine's spy object, which is I've spied our service and I've created this spy. And I've created my mock data that I want to test. Then before I start my testing, I think I'll go back to the service and I created a spy on my service. You can go back here. The methods that I showed you, get cars, add cars, remove cars. I've actually created a spy that will actually do that. It will get cars, it will add cars, and I can actually call remove cars here. I think we'll create remove cars with it. So this is how you create a spy for a service. So then if you come here, uh, you'll see that if we test our service, it will actually pass because our service is just a basic service. Then we expect, if I get cars, I expect the cars to equal to this. Then if I add another car, I'm expecting that it will actually add the other car that I've added and the expected value to be this one. I think that's straightforward. So we want to see how we can now test our component, knowing that we have actually called this service inside our component. So that is where the magic of not having test beds work, because you'll have to use a spy of this service and actually inject it, yeah, and actually use it. So that's what I did. I created this spy. Then I initialized the first function that I would use. I would I call this service that I spied on and call this function of get cars because that is what I use initially. Then um yeah, so I think I'm having, did I comment out everything? Off, no, sorry. So we come here where I'm using the cars, I think fetching cars, that's the first test that I was using. So on component init, I expect this dot cars to equal to this test data. And as you can see, it passes because, yes, I expect fetch cars. This is what this test is about. I think we can, for us to understand further, I think we can comment out some of these things and return a wrong value. We see if actually our service works. Mm-hmm. It's not needed. That's okay. So let us say mm-hmm, the expected cars. I removed this one so that I was mocking our service. Our test will actually fail. It should pass because no expected cars. I'm returning that value. Let me return a different value, just an empty array. So I say get cars. This is the service. Then I pass. If our service, let's say backend has failed, so it's not returning what I want. Doesn't run. It's returning, let's say, an empty array, and I'm expecting it to return a value. As you can see, our test should fail. It should fetch cars should fail because I'm expecting an empty array to be equal to this, which is not right. I'm expecting a length of 0 to equal to 3. So that is how our test will fail at that moment. So with us mocking the service, it means everything you want the service to do will actually experience it in this component. Just delete this so that it doesn't confuse me. So that is the first bit of my presentation, just testing a service. So the next bit is how do you test uh, an observable? That's the other thing I wanted to show. So there are two ways you can test an observable: the common focusing, the common tick and done syntax, and this is what most people use actually. Mm-hmm. So I'm having my observable here, and let us see what this observable does. A behavior subject. It basically returns a behavior subject that is, I actually created an observable of, I actually create this as an observable of this state here, is car available. So this is car available will actually help me to, I'm using it to actually, if I remove all the cars, I'm using it to render these templates. No cars are available. So that's what the behavior subject I'm using it for, to manage the state, to tell me if there are no cars, I render a different component. If there are cars, I render this one. So here, I'm checking, it's very simple because I'm just checking if there are no cars or the objective undefined, or if the length of the cars is less than 1, then I populate it with a false. I say it's false, but on default, since my car object, I know it will have a value, I'm initializing it with a true. So there are two ways you can test the behavior, an observable. So you can use this. Let me comment this. This is the key way where people use. You test component of this, then you subscribe, you use Vector sync and take, which actually works. But at times it takes, there may be that delay by the time something renders or something happens, it fails. You start having flaky tests because of this. So another way you can test observable is using this. I think there's it's called marble testing. So with marble testing, it's very easy. There's an npm package called marble test. So you just install it in your application, and by default, it will be picked here. So what you do, instead of testing and subscribing, as you would do here, it means you go subscribe to this observable and see if it has returned true or false. So the best way for you to avoid the timeouts and think and wait, I think at times you even do timeout. You can do it using mobile testing. So with mobile testing, we just initialize. For this test to work, we'll have to call on init first. That is what the test expects for us to populate. So if we test, it will check if this observable has a true value or false. So with mobile testing, it's easy. So you just do component.this behavior subject, then you say to be observable this true or false. It's that simple. So here it can be any value, an object, a return type from, let's say, GraphQL. You have a specific type that you expect to be returned. That's what you put here. So yeah, that is the other thing that I wanted to show you guys. Then the other part that I needed to show you guys on this testing with Hammer is how do you test an if-else statement. I think some of us have been here. You want to test a scenario, then you find yourself just testing the positive value, and you don't handle if it's not. So for that, it's recommended that you write tests for both scenarios. If true, I think I've handled it both here and here. So if true, by default, of course, we expect that our observable will be, let's say, if the length is greater than 1 and our cars has values inside, it will be true by default. So what happens if it returns a false value? So with that, this is what we recommend you do. You can do another describe. Yeah, there are very many methods, but I wanted to do the after all one, but I think we can try later, or someone can give a how. You can do live coding. So you can, the first describe, I think it just, um, it fetches data and it returns this type of expected cars. So if it's false, it means we need our expected cars array to be less than 1. So with that, we will initialize, we will call our service, then give return a type of empty, an empty array. So it means the length will be less than 1. Then we initialize our component. Then when we initialize a component, if we use async and tick, by default, it will actually return a false value. As you can see, my test is passing here if it's false. So where are you test? Okay. If it's a false value, it will actually pass. And the same thing you do with mobile testing, you will just put here a false value if it's a false scenario. So basically with if-else statement, you first start testing true, then you test false. Then it is recommended that if you're going to change the return type value, you first start, I cannot do like a positive then a negative, the test will be flaky. So you first do the positive scenarios first, then the negative. If I'm modifying this, I can do it like down here. Yeah, I can return it down here so that it doesn't, because I cannot put this one in the middle because test order will actually, it might affect another test that is depending on this value to be true. I think that's what I had to share. I hope I've not gone too fast. If you have any questions, you can bring them. If you have any comments, you can bring them. And if you have any suggestion or something you can try, please bring it up. Yep. Or was I talking to myself?
Yeah. Thank you. No. We are here.
Okay.
Yeah. But thank you, Donata, for that session. And I believe it's something that everyone has learned something from this. And appreciate the fact that you've touched on a topic that's it's kind of like a thorn in the flesh for most developers, whereby some might not be very much inclined. Some of us might not be very inclined to writing tests for applications, but it's something that has been proven to be very effective with regards to ensuring that your code is foolproof and error-proof as well. But thank you for that. I'd like to open up the stage for any questions that anyone might have for Donata.
Yes,
Please feel
please.
free to unmute yourself and ask.
Any questions? Or everyone is digesting? I went too fast. Yeah.
Yes, Winnie.
I'm good. Good night, Donata. I hope your night is going on well.
Yes.
Yeah, so I have a question. So since you've taken us through unit testing using Karma, if let's say you're supposed to do several type of testing, is it advisable you only use one framework, or you can just use, I mean, it's advisable if you only use one library, or you can combine different types of library as long as the testing that you want to do is available in that library?
For unit tests or for integration test also?
So I'm assuming, let's say like you have an application and you're supposed to do both unit test and integration test. So are you allowed to, like, let's say use Karma and Just, or you should only pick one library that has all?
I think that's organization preference, but imagine if you're supposed to write both unit and integration test using Kama, it means if you wanted to do like more component testing, you'll find yourself probably not doing, or if you're able to mock everything, you can do all in one. But it's recommended if you want to do, like, if your application is big enough. If it's small, I think you can do both. But if your application is big, I think it's better if you separate, so that you can be able to track the journeys of unit tests. What are you unit testing? Of course, unit testing, it's recommended you test every bit of your code. Then with integration, you test various journeys. Let's say adding a car end to end from when it's being added on the portal. You check if the inputs are being filled. If you get to the DB, if DB returns a value and you can view it, that's basically a whole journey. Which I think if you have a big application, it's recommended you split, but I think it's preference. Anyone who has done different or integration and unit, or the same one, because I think at the moment where we work at CarePay, we do separate unit, separate integration unit. We use this one, and integration we use another one. Yeah. Have I answered your question, Winnie?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Winnie, for that question. Yeah, I think it's also a question that I've seen with regards to mixing testing tools or testing libraries. So I think it's very important to for anyone who is in a particular company to look at the preference of what the company. If they're interested, or they're specifically looking at Karma, you can move up more ahead with Karma. From my experience, Karma is what people are mostly get started with, and it's pretty straightforward. But then when you go higher to things like Jest, I wouldn't say it's a bit higher, but then compared to Karma, it has a bit of sophistication, for lack of a better word. So it's always great to at least get to understand the basics, what testing is all about, what exactly are you testing. It's very important to do that before you even jump into a particular library or testing tool that you're interested in. Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much, Donat, also for that great response. Anyone else maybe might have a question? Please feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself.
Or if you didn't understand anything, you can go back. Or if you want to try something, you can try. If you have something in mind, with a convince if you're like, let us try if this will work. Yes, Sam?
Yeah, thank you for the session. That was really, yeah, I've also learned something today. Interesting. You always learn every time. So not really a question. Um, so from this, we see how we are able to test our code. Now, there's this phrase that I've heard before called test driven something, test driven
Uh,
development, where people actually write the tests first, then they write the actual code. So maybe also as an open discussion, has anyone ever experienced such a thing before, or is it just a theoretical concept somewhere?
I think we were to pair up with, is he on the call? I've not seen him. He was to try and do test before. I think we will do in one of our testing series. Test before now, writing the functions. Wayne, I think we can do in one of our series is how we test before writing a function.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, test-driven development. I think it's also another concept that not many are fans of. I personally, I've always been told, like, I was taught actually when I was learning testing, like test-driven development is the way to go, whereby you write your test even before you write your features. So don't worry about that. We're going to have a session very soon based on the testing series. And I think Alex will be the one who'll be doing that. And he'll take us to TDD, or test-driven development. So Sam, just be on the lookout for that. Yeah, all your questions will be answered, even
Awesome.
with the help of demos and all that.
Nice.
All right. Thank you. Yes, Sigu?
Oh, when you've decided not to answer Sam.
No, no,
Sam,
no, no.
yes, it's a real Sam, yes, it's a real thing. It happens. People do it. It's not a theory. It happens. And that's what will be covered in the future.
Awesome. I look forward to that.
All right, thank you. Maybe I didn't hear that question earlier. Apologies for that. But thank you, Sigu, for that. Yes, Chesa.
I think also aside from it being a real thing, usually most companies usually don't usually have, especially startup situations, don't usually follow it because for lack of better terms, finding time to do it versus what the product needs to offer. Sometimes you'll find that managers would see it as a quote unquote waste of time because we want the product out. So would you start building code so that to write code first, or just write the code that will bring the product once again? It's also quite an argument in a way to show which is the best way for going for development. Guess that's my 2 cents about it.
Yep, I also agree. I mean, if you tell a PO it's that you'll take the first 2 weeks writing test and another 2 weeks writing code, I think none of them will agree with that. Anyway, thank you. Yeah, I believe my question is answered.
Can I add on something?
Yeah, sure.
TDD does not mean that I spend a whole day writing tests. It just means that I know what I expect the output to be. If I'm working on the car and I expect the car to have 4 wheels, I'll write a test that expects a car to have 4 wheels. Then I do the implementation that makes the test to pass. So TDD means that if I'm working on a feature for the day, and the feature is to be able to have a car, then by the end of the day, I have a car. I wrote the test and I did that. It's having the test before the implementation. That's all. It's not that you're doing a whole day of tests.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
and from my personal experiences with TDD works best if you know exactly what you need at the end of it all. You can do TDD if there's clearly stated outputs and expected outputs.
Yeah.
So you just start writing them down. This is exactly what I know I expect. This is what was described to me as an output. So I'll have them written down as a test. Then I do my implementations. At the end of the day, as long as the tests pass, then it means I've satisfied everything that was needed. It's not for everything, but it works at some situations.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sigu. Yes, Francis?
Okay, thank you so much. I think also to add on to the test-driven development. So I know it is something that most developers actually don't want to hear about, but just like Sigu has put it up, when you exactly know what you need at the end of the day, as a developer, test-driven development is going to save you a lot of time because you're already streamlining what exactly you need at the end of the day. So when you write your tests, they pass. Trust me, you're going to save a lot of time compared to somebody who has not taken that approach. That's my submission that I don't want to put across. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Francis, for that contribution. And maybe just to, throw this question back to the audience, right? Especially with regards to test-driven development. So, for example, you've been given a couple of features that you need to develop or you need to implement, right? Do you go with test-driven development or just go ahead, first of all, and build the features, then write the tests? Or where do you balance between maybe, let's say, time management and productivity with efficiency? I don't know, something like that. Anyone can just answer the question.
Yeah, I can go first.
Sure, Sigu.
Yeah, so it depends. That's usually the correct answer. It depends. And the reason I'm saying it depends is because if my feature is clear cut and I know the exact expected output, it's easier for me to start by just writing the outputs as a test. But in majority of the cases, developers don't know how to approach problems. They don't know what is finally expected of them. So they would rather spend their time tweaking and working around with things than writing tests to confirm the final thing that they've come up with. So if you know the final thing that is needed of you, then you can write the test first. And the final, I mean absolute numbers or absolute stuff. Absolute in that I know this should be 3 users. I know there must be a minimum of 1 admin. I know there must be a minimum of this, and that. Well, just go ahead and write the test. If you're not sure about things, then write the implementations first. Fumble, chukua siku mzima just fumbling, then write a test to avoid regressions. Write a test to confirm that what you've done is exactly what is now the required thing. And now your test is just confirming that another person's changes are not going to make these things not work anymore. Nimeeleweka?
Kabisa,
I've done the
loud and
feature.
clear.
Yeah, I've done the feature. I know how it should be now. Saizi niko sure because we are never sure when we're starting sometimes. If you're not sure when you're starting, don't write the test. Be sure what you're doing first, then write a test to make sure that what you're sure about withholds even in the next 3 years, as long as nothing has been changed.
All right, thank you.
But I think to you, Sigu, what if mostly our development, we normally follow agile development process. So at times, what you scope in the first place normally is not what the outcome would be, especially when you're starting a project. You start a project, let's say we define that this is what we're expecting. This is what you expect this object or probably this car object to be when you start scoping the project. Then as you proceed, it changes. So if you start DDD, you write your test first, catering for this scenario. You write your feature, yeah. Then once it changes, it means now you'll be doing double changing every time. Like you go to test or you start with the features first, then you'll mute the test for that. or does
All right.
does that work where the development process is just like probably what happened to finish this fast, then like you don't expect that to change anytime soon or never to change, because I think that's normally the main challenge.
Okay. Let me clear this up. The moment you're having your PR up, no one will neither know whether you wrote the test first or you did the feature first.
Oh yeah.
No one cares.
Yeah.
So by the time your work is being merged in, it means nothing has changed. By the time it's being merged in, the test is coming together with the work, right?
Yeah.
So if things change, whether you wrote it first or you wrote it later, you have to change them, then you have to change them. Whatever you edit first depends on whether you believe in the TDD first or not. So TDD is just when did you write the test, but the merging happens for both the test and the implementation. Part of the reasons people practice TDD is to make it clear the expectation. Kwa akili yako, the moment you write all the tests, it's now clear that this is what is expected. What you've highlighted is what is expected of my output. Hii ndio kitu inatakikana. So I can test against this, then do an implementation.
Okay.
Once it's merged in and the expected things change, then I can change it in the test first, then implement it and make sure that it changes. Sometimes it's never this clear. When it's never this clear, don't write the test first.
Yeah, that. I think that is where I was going to.
Yeah, if you don't know, if it's not clear, don't write the test first. Usijaribu, you'll waste a lot of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Sigu, I think even when it's clear the first time, how the management of modifications and changes down the line from sprint to sprint does not really work well with that, because if it means that if in the first sprint we always know that this was what was required, that means every time we are going back to change the tests. Is that what you're saying?
Tests, okay. So the reason we do have tests is to confirm that things are working as they are expected by the time we are merging in. Once we merge this thing in, inafaa ifanye hivi. That is what we expect. And the test confirms that any deviation fails. True.
Yes, that's okay. Up until there.
Yes. Now, if a request is made to change a logic or a business logic, which means we no longer treat Subaru and BMW as two different cars, they need to be one.
Yes.
If that is the case, then both the implementation and the test must change.
So now this factors in. Now this comes back now to the aspect where we were talking about time, because if I was supposed to change this implementation from before, wouldn't I have which side does it really matter if I write the test before I write the code or after I write the code?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Because by the time this work is being put in production, both are there. And that work never cares whether you wrote the test first or later. It never cares. The advantage of writing the test first is it makes it pretty clear. Nikiangalia this highlighted line 37 to 40, I know exactly what to expect. This is what has been described to me.
Okay.
Even before my implementation, I now know this is what is needed. So I can write this test, then go and do an implementation of the same. If it passes, then my logic is clear. It's on point.
I always thought that I always thought that the best implementation of test-driven development was not rather that the people that should know the end result rather than while writing the code to know the end result is more on the line of the QA testers rather than the developers or the engineers from the start, because now we remove one bias, and two, we also remove time for dealing with bugs inside the tests.
Oh,
so in a scenario where, like, let's let's say we are a team right now. So you are the QA engineer, I'm the front-end developer. We are both in the sprint planning, we are planning. So you write the code that tests my code. So in the end, it's more like a black box test that once I've written it, once it goes to you, you're running, your code is just running against my code. So if it fails, we're not going through, rather than me doing both of them, because it forces me to write code towards what I want it to be, even without knowing. I don't know if that makes sense.
Possibly. So I think what I've understood from what you said is there are two ways, there are two people who can write a test, a QA engineer or the developer. Both of them can write the test, right?
Yes.
All right. If the QA engineer writes the test and hands them over to you before you do implementation, we can technically call that TDD. You already have the test, now you need to do an implementation.
True.
If the customer tells you what they want, no QA involved, you write your test, then you make sure that your tests pass after writing the test from what the customer wants. You've done TDD by yourself, not through the QA. If the QA tests after you've implemented, they are actually testing what you've already implemented. Now, if they do find a bug and they give you how they came up with the bug in terms of maybe a test, that's still TDD because you have the test before you implement the solution to the bug. So TDD is just when, not who. When was the test written? Was it written before or after the implementation? Hiyo ndo TDD. By the time you're merging in, you don't care. Hata ujuangi. It just gives you some clarity of mind of what is expected.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sigu. Thank you very much, Jess, also for that great conversation and discussion. It really opens up the idea itself to even further discussions and understanding when and where to make use of all these different concepts or principles. Yeah, I think Sam had his hand raised. Did you have something to add, Sam? Okay. Okay. I'd take that as a no. Right. Maybe anyone? Yes, Winnie?
And for me, my question is not for the expert. I'm taking you guys back to basics. What's the difference between integration testing and end-to-end testing?
Yeah, I can attempt. I think integration testing is basically, I think how various components and various functionality of your application are actually working. Let's say integration, you're trying to integrate, let's say, a login component to, you want a user to log in. Then once they have logged in, they probably see their profile. So integration testing, first, if you could have done unit testing, you could have just tested the login feature, yeah? You log in, then you make sure once a user logs in, probably they get their name and something. So if you want to do integration, is now you add the scope. So you want to test the whole journey of, I log in, I view my profile. So end-to-end is I come. And integration, normally for front end, you have to add the whole component testing, like the DOM, and you like the elements. Probably a user puts in the email, username, password, then they hit the backend, they get a response, then they get their token, then they view their details. But if you could have done unit tests, you could have just done, if I put the email and password and hit the backend, will I get the response that I want? Yeah. If I fetch the user information, do I get the response? Like you've split it up into various units. Yeah. If I put the username and password, I hit the backend. Do I get the response that I want? That is unit. Then if I fetch, will I get my details, the ones that I entered when I was entering? That's another unit. But now if you want to test the whole journey of logging in and viewing your profile, now that you've gone into integration, then now E2E, I think E2E is, there is E2E you can do smoke or you can do integration. Integration is now the middle layer. So you've done login from entering the username and password, hitting the backend, fetching the data. Now that's integration. You've integrated front end, backend, and the display, and just how the flow goes. Then if now you go to now, there is a higher level where you can test like the whole, once I log in, what do I want to do? I want to add probably a car. I want to delete a car. I want to edit a, I want to edit a car. Now that whole journey again, now that goes to, now I'm getting confused because now there's unit, there's integration, now there's now the, that is part of a journey of integration. There are small journeys. You can do login, then you add, edit, delete. Now you connect all of them. But now a small component, adding a car, that's a unit. Deleting a car, that's a unit. Editing a car, that's a unit. So then when you meet both of them, now that's E2E. You're going through a whole journey of probably your application. I think that's my 2 cents of that. Anyone who can add?
Niko na very weird explanation of the same. Very weird.
Okay.
Unit testing is being petty. When you're being petty, you're doing unit testing. For example, when someone, I hope everyone understands Swahili. When someone tells you napenda mapua yako, now they're being petty. Your nose, your eyes, they are being picky on things. That's unit testing. You're testing the small things. Integration or end-to-end is being vague. You know exactly what it is. Uko too vague too, but you're not being clear. But you know what you're talking about. I don't know if that made sense. So integration test everything toka mwanzo hadi mwisho. Unit test is very petty on what it confirms that a car has a make, a car has a model, a car has mileage. Very petty. Integration can confirm that the car can move. A little bit weird, but ina confirm to everything in general. Did that make sense? Ukikumbuka to unit is very petty. Ukikumbuka hivyo you'll be safe.
Thank you for that explanation, Sigu. Thank you also for the explanation, Donata. Really appreciate it. I like the fact that also you provide a bit of analogy for people also to get, acquainted to it and understand it. So thank you for that. I don't know, Winnie, have you been answered well?
Yes, I've been answered, but he hasn't provided an analogy for end-to-end.
So mapua yako. All right. An analogy for end to end. When someone tells you, I like your nose, they're being very picky and nini. When someone tells you, you're cute, or that they're just talking about you overally with just your whole face. So end to end, so it means ameangalia mapua, macho, nini, everything, and all of it anasema iko sawa. That's an end to end. You just confirm that everything iko sawa. But akianza kupick nitty-gritties, macho, nini, hivi, that's now a unit. Chesa.
I think also we're going with the same analogy. Looking at unit tests, just the same way Siga said, I like your nose. Then when you go to integration tests, for me, how I can see it is like, I like how you walk, because now you're using two or more things within your body, because you're using your legs, you see where you're going, there's a style towards it. Then when I say end-to-end test is, I just like you. It doesn't matter what, everything that you do from start to finish, all the way to the end. That's how I would say.
Oh, interesting. Oh, those are great analogies. It makes a bit more sense now. Yeah, thank you very much, Sigu. Thank you, Chesa, for that. Winnie, is that a good explanation enough?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. Before we wrap up, any other question? Any other question?
Hello.
Yes, hello, Karanja. Yes.
I would just like to ask if anybody has reading materials or suggestions for testing interceptors.
Anyone? Does anyone have such kind of content? And if so, we could definitely share it out when we upload the session. Nata, you have some?
No, I think I'm just thinking roughly. So, like the why, or do you want to go integration way? Or do you want to like unit test data interceptors? I think that's my
Like to give an example for the project I'm doing, I want to test. I want to ensure that when my request enters the interceptor, codes will be handled differently. Probably if it's an endpoint that requires a token is fetched well, or generally it's not a must we test interceptors.
Yeah, because I'm thinking by the time I think our work is just to make sure it gets to backend, then backend returns a response. We catch it or we say if it's an error, right? So why would we want to test if whatever we passed backend has received? Unless you want to do that on our side. But I'm just wondering like the why would you want to test the interceptors? If I look at it in that manner, I feel if your function tests if you've submitted data to backend, what you're waiting for is a response from backend. If you get a response and you've already mocked the response or you know what the response would be, I think that is what the test should be about. If it goes and I get a response. Yeah.
I think you have a strong point there.
Yeah.
There's also the aspect of you can't test requests. I think I've seen it in the Angular documentation. I'm not so sure about that, but you can confirm that where you can the Angular testing library allows you to test things like if it's a GET request or like that, or even if the error codes that come back, or if the context that the error messages have come back with. But I'll check. I can check that and confirm for you.
Yeah. But that comes back if the error message comes back, so you've already gotten a response.
Yeah. Because technically in the test I'll write for the service, I'll test for those things, whether it's a GET request, the error response content. I think it will cover for the interceptor.
Yes, you don't really need to go do the interceptor test.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we had Sam. There's Sam, and then Peter, and then Winnie.
Thank
yes,
you.
Sam?
I'll make this short. I think we should also be very pragmatic with exactly what we test. Sometimes writing code like when the default spec file that comes with a new project, it will just test if the component has been initialized. I personally, yeah, like that. I feel like this is a very useless test. And it just adds to the code base and lines of code. So I think we should be very pragmatic. For example, testing that a get is called. I don't see the value in that. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just saying we should be pragmatic also in getting value from the test, not just writing to see if on ng on init has been called or things like that. Thank you.
Akis,
I
you allow
think
me to respond to that.
Okay.
It's true, you need to be pragmatic. And again, it depends. I have seen situations where a change in library versions makes components to fail to load.
yeah, you're
So
right.
just that simple test, the user might never be able to load that page, and you might never be able to know. It has happened to me before. So it's simple until you update the library, then things just fall apart. But it's true, you need to be very pragmatic. Don't test libraries. Come a library, you include a library and does something. Don't even include tests that works with does the logic of the library. Achana nayo.
I think I'll add on to what Sigu has said. Again, another thing is you're not supposed to like test. Your test shouldn't look like your functions exactly. Your test should just have what are you trying to test? Probably this observable. Like with this one, I think you want to write like a whole code inside tracing the observable. Just I have this, I want it to return this. This is what your test should look like. Like you're testing what the outcome of your function would be. Not taking every function here and putting it as a test, then you want to test and assert it. No. You just put this, if I call this function, this is what I'm expecting to get. Yeah. As you can notice, we've tested this, but not really called this method because it's called here. So we're just not forcing to call this so that we test it, but we are calling it on init, and we're expecting like this value will change based on this input. So you don't have to do an if statement, a whole if statement on your test. You have to like test the expectation. Yeah. Like you don't take whatever your function looks like and you bring it to code. The moment you do that, you're not testing. You actually just copy pasting your code to testing. Yeah.
Think what Donata is saying is in other terms is we should test the behavior, not the values.
Yes. That level. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Peter, you had something?
Yeah, thank you for having this session tonight. So mine is not really a question directed towards this session, but just asking out when shall be the testing session involving jest. Yeah.
The next one, I think we were to first start, everyone has Karma, so how do we move it to jest with what the knowledge we are having? I think we have to start from this to now upgrading to more complex scenarios. The next session, we will surely migrate it to jest. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering because I see Angular is kind of, they have dropped the support for Karma. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I think right now it's more of like Angular is like opening it up, especially on the testing side of things, opening it up to other libraries rather than pegging it to just Karma and Jasmine. So now we have just, you can also use Playwright. You can go the Cypress way if you're also interested in that. So yeah, things are definitely changing. So yeah, we'll definitely have that session. So just be on the lookout for that. We will share also more details on when that session will be. But yeah, we're definitely going to be having like a testing series. This was the first among many. And yeah, we're definitely going to have such discussions whereby, do some bit of live coding questions and also just answering questions based on the audience's, maybe if you have some sort of like an error that you had maybe in particular testing, we can be able to even discuss it as well. Yeah, but thank you for that question. Right. Anyone else before we close? All right. Donata, any parting shots?
I think what I would say about parting shots of my testing, testing is for sure a journey, but if you take it as, I think as it is, I wouldn't say like logically, you don't do a lot of thinking of a test. Like, I want to test this. It's just logical. What will happen? First, I'll have to call this function. Then, what if I call this function? What happens next? I have to call this from the service. Then, what do I expect? This, like, you approach it in that manner. But if you approach it in a manner of, I need to test this, where do I start from? Like, you just step by step. I think that is, if you get that in mind, like, if you want to test this thing, you approach it step by step. What happens first? You call this function. Then what happens next? That way, I think that will really help in you testing your application. Because if you approach it in that manner, is when you will notice that testing is not as difficult as you, the moment you decode that, testing is not as difficult. But the moment you put in your head that, how do I now start testing a private function? I don't know how to do it. You'll never, like, you'll just go. Probably, I think Google will give you all the answers on how you can test a private function. And what you don't really need to test the private function, you just need to test the output of this, and it's called on init. So you have to call this method and test this output. So if you approach it in that manner, like step by step, testing is not as difficult. That is my parting shot about testing. You approach it like step by step, and what that function you expect it to output. If you approach it in that manner, I think it's easier. But if you approach it in, how do I test this? It will be so difficult. It'll be like, how do I test a private function? You just approach it like, I need to test this function. So how do I test it? This function is called here. So if I call this function, what else makes this test pass? I need to test this part in this private function. So you approach it like that, step by step, step by step. That's my parting shot on testing. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Thank you very